themes that are taking place, because in my estimation, the region is at a crossroads. We are seeing the defeat of ISIS. I think that according to the Department of Defense, 99.5% of the territory that ISIS once held has now been retaken and liberated by the US-led coalition, also to some extent by the Syrian regime. ISIS, whatever it was, as a caliphate, as some organization that held a bunch of land, is now returning to its roots as a terrorist organization similar to Al-Qaeda or other organizations in terms of terrorist cells. So it's still a threat, but it's a very different kind of threat. And the US, of course, helped to build this 79-nation coalition, which is unprecedented in human history. When else have 79 countries come together to do the same thing in terms of bombing and military action? I don't mean like just the UN. So we have this huge, massive, unwieldy core coalition. In fact, all the coalition members met in Washington in the last 48 hours. They met, and as you can imagine what happened with 79 countries met, they didn't really come to any conclusions. But the United States desperately needs to have some sort of a conclusion about what is happening in Syria. And I think if all of you follow the president's comments in December, when the president decided to leave Syria, after a whole year of indicating the U.S. would stay in Syria to help block this Iranian land bridge that is being built across Iraq through Syria to Lebanon, and obviously threatening Israel. So it's not entirely clear what the U.S. policy is. We hear rumors that the U.S. would like the French and the British to step up in Syria because part of the president's policy has been, listen, why do the Americans have to do all this? In Afghanistan, for instance, 18 years of war that doesn't seem to be going anywhere, which is a totally reasonable question to ask in terms of a sunk cost, right? Why are we doing the same things for 19 years when we have no goal and there's no clear victory ahead of us, and what's the point? So the president is asking some of the right questions, but in terms of Israel, in terms of some of the things that concern us, I think the question about, okay, so if you leave eastern Syria, does it end up in the hands of the Russians, the Iranians, or those kind of questions are really important. We're also seeing in the region, and I would say in terms of a crossroads, which I think is important, after all these years of war, not just the war against ISIS, but also the Syrian civil war that has basically wound down, or Jonathan will say perhaps it's not, but the Syrian civil war certainly changed in terms of it was a war between dozens of little rebel factions and the regime, a war that eventually drew in lots of great powers and regional powers, whether Turkey moving in or Iran, or what have you. The Syrian civil war is certainly changing. It's not an active war as much anymore. It is a question of great power politics about who will kind of run Syria after this, I think. So we're seeing the region change from a period of intense chaos and massive bloodletting in which tens of millions of people became refugees. And by the way, many of those refugees, if you recall, in 2015, when 1 million refugees went into Europe, many of them to Germany, that helped to cause Brexit. So you have to remember that it's not just what happens in Syria, it's not just what happens in Iraq, it's not just what happens in Iran, or what happens in the Golan or Israel. These tiny little issues actually affect the whole world. And there's no doubt that the refugee crisis helped cause Brexit, also has encouraged many countries in Europe to vote in more populist leaders who are not only closer to Israel, but are also much more critical of the European Union project. So these have intense ramifications for U.S. foreign policy and for Israel. That's another thing. We're seeing the reduction or the end of that chaos, but the question is, okay, so the chaos ends. Just like in the end of World War II, okay, so there was a massive war, then things end. But what happens after a war ends, whether it's World War II or what happened in Vietnam in 1976 or whatever, is someone comes away the winner, or several people. And in this case, the question is, okay, so who are the real beneficiaries of this war that's happened in the Middle East? And I think it's clear and fair to argue that Iran and its allies are a major beneficiary. So that would mean not just Iran, Hezbollah, which by the way now has the health ministry in the Lebanese government, which was one of the most powerful and wealthiest ministries. Also the Houthis in Yemen, okay, they're not exactly winning, but they're there, they're a threat somehow, as well as the Shia militias in Iraq. What's happened in Iraq in the last decade or so, or 2 decades, is that Iran has been able to back or entangle itself in Iraq in such a way that parts of Iraq and Iran are almost indistinguishable, and some of the parties, the second largest party in Iraq, is basically a client or a close ally of Iran, run by people who in the 1980s were fighting alongside the Iranians against the Iraqi Saddam Hussein regime. So Iraq is now, of course, it's a country that's split because it has Sunnis and Shias and Kurds. The Kurds in northern Iraq are some of our United States' closest allies in the region. But the hostile pro-Iranian Shia militias are some of the worst adversaries to the United States in the region, and they want the U.S. to go home from Iraq. So when Trump said that the U.S. will withdraw from Syria but stay in Iraq and watch Iran, which is something he said now several times, this causes controversy in Iraq and calls for the U.S. to withdraw, and it's unclear if the United States will be able to maintain those bases in Iraq. So we may find that not only has the United States left Syria thinking, oh yes, okay, we'll move from Syria to Iraq. No, actually now America will be maybe out or reduced forces in Iraq, which is also not good news in terms of U.S. power in the region and in terms of U.S. allies, because it's not just about the United States, but the allies of the United States, whether it's Israel or Saudi Arabia or Jordan or Egypt, Bahrain or the UAE, all of those countries, all of them are going to be weakened by a U.S. policy that's weaker or reducing its forces. So another winner from all this is the Turkey, and to a lesser extent Turkey-Qatar connection. Turkey, which is ostensibly a U.S. NATO ally, if you listen to what the statements by the Turkish leader over the last decade or so have become increasingly often hostile to Israel and often relatively hostile to the United States. So for instance, when the United States called for the support for the opposition leader in Venezuela, Turkey the same day called Maduro and said, we want you to stand strong. Stand strong against who? Stand strong against the Americans, your supposed NATO ally. So I think that the Turkish role is also, not only Turkey has come out of this a winner, and the question is, okay, it's a winner. It doesn't seem to come out of it a winner and also a closer American ally. It comes out of it a winner in northern Syria, but also a country that is growing increasingly close to Russia and Iran. Look at Turkey, for instance, wanting to purchase air defense systems from Russia. And look at Turkey, for instance, every meeting in Astana or Sochi or Geneva, the Russians are hosting all these peace meetings relating to Syria. Who's in the room with the Russians? The Iranians and the Turks, not the Americans. So if the Turks are a U.S. ally, why isn't the U.S. at these meetings, for instance? Why does it seem that Russia and Turkey and Iran are basically brokering the kind of post-Syrian civil war Middle East, and that the people that lose from that tend to be the United States, Israel, and their allies? So I think those are important questions to ask. And I would say that on the positive side, or a slightly positive side, at the Dead Sea a week or a half ago or so, Egypt, Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain, the UAE all gathered alongside Saudi Arabia to discuss regional security and peace in the Middle East. And those are all countries that are basically close allies of the United States, two of which have relations with Israel, Jordan and Egypt. So those would seem to be countries which are working more closely together as the United States power appears to decrease a bit, and those countries are trying to step up and take greater responsibility. So that is in some ways a positive sign. Most of those countries were also at a meeting in Washington in the last 48 hours on the sidelines of the coalition meeting, because all these countries are mostly in the coalition. They were also meeting with the U.S. State Department as well as part of this kind of Southern Middle Eastern alliance system, which doesn't, of course, include Israel in its meetings, but Israel is, of course, kind of part of that conceptual structure, since Israel and them share the same threat in terms of Iran. So we're saying those kind of large brushstrokes, and we can then have a discussion afterwards, some questions about where things are leading. I just want to introduce two different things. Jonathan Spire and I created last year a research center called the Middle East Center for Reporting and Analysis. We don't have enough of these flyers, but I can pass several of them around. Jonathan and I have worked in the region for many years, even longer than me. He's reported many times from Syria, I've reported many times from Iraq. And what we realized over the years of doing a lot of reporting in these countries was that you go to the country, you spend a week or two with the people there, you see all sorts of amazing things, and you certainly begin to see some of these emerging threats, whether it's Iranian Shia flags flying on top of Iraqi tanks that were given to Iraq by the United States, or other types of things. But we realized, we need to have a center that can kind of utilize all of these sources that we have in these countries on the ground to try to discuss and bring out information that's happening every day there, not just